Forbes Books presents Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow. Transformation for a new and better world. Here's David.
My guest this week is a living embodiment of a series on Netflix. She's been a best-selling author, a U.S. ambassador, a presidential, secretarial, and gubernatorial advisor. Her name is Lisa Gable. As a former CEO and advisor to Fortune 500 companies, Lisa has orchestrated the successful turnaround of private and public organizations in all industries. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. It is wonderful to be with you.
Lisa, I joke that your life sounds like a Netflix series, but it's true. You've lived quite a life. Did you ever imagine this happening when you were a kid?
No, I really didn't. I've been so fortunate. And, when I was a little girl, I was fascinated by warfare and the history of warfare. And my bedroom had these curtains that had military weaponry from the Revolutionary War. And I would make my father let me watch those movies on Sunday afternoon, that were about World War II. And we'd go off and visit Civil War sites and Revolutionary War sites. And my parents kept saying, as my white go-go boots, which were extremely clean because I was very prissy, they're like, how are you going to make all this work? This is not the generation that was encouraging girls to go into alternative areas of work. And I said, I'm going to make it work. All of it's going to work. And I've just been thrilled to death to have these moments and inflection points that have led to different places in my life where I've been able to tap into all of the things that interest me and excite me and energize me.
That's great. Following up that, you've served 4 U.S. presidents, 2 governors. What were some of the leadership traits that they all shared that are recognizable and remarkable in your view?
They wanted to solve complex problems, and they were very clear about the problem they wanted to solve. Starting in the Reagan White House, Ronald Reagan came in with really 3 different points of view. One was he wanted to lower taxes. He wanted to have deregulation so that it would allow the economy to really take off as we were suffering through a period of high inflation. And the third thing he wanted to do is win the Cold War, which we won. And right now we're losing a little ground on that. But each of the people that I worked for brought me in to solve a very specific problem. And they were giving me the resources I needed to be able to focus all attention and energy. And that, whether that was CEOs, philanthropists, or U.S. presidents, it's been something that's been a consistent formula of the relationships that I've had.
You were there, and following up, you were there with Ronald Reagan in the administration and the Cold War. Is it odd to you how the marbles have fallen with Russia after all these years, and Vladimir Putin is trying to get back something that he lost after 1990, 91?
It is disturbing. Today I was speaking to people from around the world, and one of the things that we had during the Reagan administration was a Captive Nations Week. And we also had an office that was supporting captive nations. And if you look that up on Wikipedia, there are a list of nations that were actually under the thumb of the Soviet Union. That included at that time Afghanistan, as well as the Eastern Bloc, as well as countries in Asia. And I would watch those individuals, and you can imagine, the variety of dress of envoys, representative of those countries, come into the administration. And Ronald Reagan, both when I was at the Defense Department and the White House, prioritized what they told him about the fate of their nations, the potential for bringing their countries into freedom, and how that would help increase economic viability for everyone. He prioritized that. And so I have to say, I was in my 20s at that time. I'm in my 50s now. And he always said that freedom could be lost in a generation. And yet I never thought it would be. And so I am bothered and disturbed seeing these captive nations like the Ukraine, which was actually where the concept came from, starting to fall again.
Going back, way back there when you worked for Intel, it's worth a little over $1 billion, and now it's worth nearly $80 billion. What do you think fueled their dominance and also their longevity?
It was a clear definition of job one. I was at Intel when it was run by a trio, which was Gordon Morris, chairman of the board, Andy Grove as CEO, and Craig Barrett as COO and heir apparent. Craig would later become the CEO and chairman of the board of Intel, and he was my mentor. When I walked into the semiconductor world, and at Intel, it was a $1.5 billion company, and the U.S. had lost market share to the Japanese. And so there were two goals. One was to regain market share on behalf of the United States within semiconductors and establish the standards where U.S. semiconductors would become the standard for the market. And job one for Intel was to become the standard chip for the market. And it was really built off of Moore's Law and the theories that Gordon had come up with about how that would occur in engineering. And so we focused everything on job one. We talked about job one. Business update meetings that were held on a regular basis were about job one. That was about market dominance in semiconductor manufacturing. And what Craig did is that he was the manufacturing genius, and he had a process called copy exactly. And they were focused on removing as many variables from their path. And so within the manufacturing world, if you could have each of the sites operate down to the screws in the wall being exactly the same, you knew that if one plant went down, you could ramp up on another. You knew that there would be consistency in your output. And so what I learned from those companies is the need to focus. And where Intel began to lose in the market is when they lost their focus. They started going way too broadly. They didn't focus on becoming the best in a particular category. And so just like the conversation we had in the Cold War, maybe it's because I'm getting older, it is disturbing that we're having exactly the same conversation again about U.S. loss of prowess in semiconductor manufacturing and sort of the loss of focus. And so I'm hoping that these inflection points are going to bring us back into focusing our attention on what's important and joining together in order to solve the things that are most important to our economic viability, both as businesses and as a nation.
Well, yes, history may repeat itself and can. Your male mentors were the ones who first taught you how to own a room. Did that come easy for you?
No, because I'm 5 feet tall, and for most of my life, I weighed under 100 pounds, and right now I've eased over 100, but you can only imagine, and I looked very, very young. So what they, and it was hard, right? I would walk into a room, and there's a picture that went viral on the web of me at the Army War College at the age of, I think I was 28 years old, and I am seated at a table where I was part of a national security seminar with a group of men who were all getting their first stars. And it was not only U.S. military officers, but also officers from foreign countries. And the country, I laugh at the picture, right? You're looking at this picture and here's this tiny, tiny person who looks like she's 12 years old sitting in the middle of all of these military men who'd actually fought in wars. And so my mentors taught me that you needed to always speak with facts. And they taught me to research at a very in-depth level what I was going to say, understand what was going to go on in the room before I walked in the door. And they also taught me to focus that if I had one opportunity to speak, what was the most important point I wanted to make? And so I didn't try to compete by, constantly inserting myself in the conversation. In fact, to some degree, they'd all be sitting there wondering what I was doing at the end of the table, but I would find my moment. And then I would speak up, and I would have done my research. I would speak with a series of facts. I would articulate why I thought we needed to focus on one particular problem and stop focusing on these other things that didn't matter as much. And I would find that the room, all of these men would go, okay, just like she said, and then they would articulate their answer. So, it's okay to call out what I call the dancing elephant wearing the purple tutu with polka dots dancing in the middle of the table. A lot of people aren't comfortable doing that, but I knew I was so prepared when I walked in, and I had a firm vision as to what I wanted to accomplish in that meeting that I ended up owning the room in many cases.
Thank you for that. Last fall, you released the book Turnaround. It's a guide for companies as they emerge from the economic constraints experienced during COVID-19. And there are 4 parts I'd love to get into as listeners may greatly benefit. You look back to your experience with FAIR and bringing together a coalition of food and beverage manufacturers that cut calories across the board by 1 trillion, as well as realigning costs in an effort to get priorities in line with World Trade Fair. And as an ambassador, when I told my middle market disrupting friends that I was bringing on Lisa Gable, they shot back, "That's not disruption in sustainable leadership." I told them, the hell it isn't. Lisa's done an outstanding job with very large organizations with exceedingly rapid change and disruptive turnaround. Due to the reasons why people call outsiders to help, desperation or total inspiration. Let's take a deep dive of your secret sauce to success. Could you talk about visualizing the future? You talk about needing to do this, stop thinking about the problem and focusing on where you want to end.
I do. I mean, what I tell people, and it's interesting because I think I told you I just spoke with a group of foreign leaders who are trying to develop multi-sectoral programs to solve very big problems in their countries. And so it's interesting talking to people from such a wide variety about the different problems that they were facing and in the different multi-sectoral entities that were engaged, from government, business, and philanthropy. What I always tell people is, if you can wave your magic wand, what do you want the world to look like? Stop thinking about what you're doing right now. Stop talking about why we can't do something. Well, we can't do it that way because of this. We can't do it that way because of that. Tell me if you were starting today and you could build this thing from the very get-go and you were burning it down to the ground, starting over, what would you want it to look like? And then within that framework, start auditing everything that is currently being done and go back and audit the past, because it's not only the things that are happening at this current point in time. It may have been something that happened 10 years ago where somebody turned the wrong way on the road. And that ends up being the underlying cause of the problem that you're facing today. I describe it as if someone built a house and they had an architect, and all of a sudden new owners came in and they added a fireplace, and then they decided to add a driveway, and they decided to add a swimming pool without the same architect. And you look at it and go, well, that doesn't make any sense. But you've been living in this house. You're comfortable in this house, even if, a snapshot of it makes it not to be the prettiest of houses. And by auditing that process, what you can do is you begin to rank and rate. So you look at all the things that you're currently doing and you rank and rate them, and you look at and you say, in that perfect world scenario, does this thing matter anymore? Do I need to be focusing my attention on it? And at the same time, using the Intel process, what's job one that's going to get me to where I want to go? Within that context, it may be that you focus on job one and you align your incentives with other organizations and entities so that they help you accomplish that objective, because you're sharing the same objective. And you're getting rid of things because you've ranked and rated them and you've understood why you don't need to do them anymore. What you also do is you dig down deep and you find out what the underlying cause of the problem is. In every situation I have been brought into has been where I am the Hail Mary. They've tried things over and over and over again. They've brought in leaders with the right credentials and very specific credentials who'd come up the line in a very specific way. And with that, they brought their prejudices to the party, right? They're tweaking around the edges. They're not really looking at it with fresh eyes and saying, well, what's the underlying cause of what caused us to go awry? And it's very rarely what people think that it is. And as I dig into it and I find that one particular problem, what we did with the calorie commitment is that we went through that process with 16 food and beverage companies. We got them to really focus on what was the one common denominator they all shared, and how is that common denominator feeding into the problem of obesity. And then we went after that problem and we competed on that problem together. That gives you a path to the future. You set an audacious goal around how to solve that problem. You align your incentives to changing towards that problem. And by doing so, you're hyper-focused, you're solving the underlying problem, you've got everybody running down the same path. They may have different reasons as to why they want to achieve an objective, but you're able to get to that perfect world future that you want to have.
Okay, you identify jobs 1, 2, and 3 and project a reasonable time frame for the jobs. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, what I talk about is job one. Job one is the number one thing you have to do to survive. right? That is the most important thing you can do. At Intel Corporation, it was dominance in semiconductors. Jobs 2 and 3, I call them the backup singers, right? That's getting to other things that you must do, possibly for political reasons, for customer reasons, for social reasons. They aren't the primary function, but you can't get to the primary function without solving all three of them. And so with each of them, you have to set timelines. One of those, job 1, is going to be the thing that you as an organization must accomplish. You must be best in class at. You must be the most competitive at. Jobs 2 and 3 can be attributes that you share with other people because you can find goals where you share a commonality of interest and you can work together to achieve those other objectives that will clear the runway for you to continue to run forward on your primary.
What do you mean by reframing success?
Usually, again, it gets down to the visualizing the future. When people have too many things that they're focused on doing, or if they have too many interests at play, you have to reframe success in a manner that all of you agree that this is the primary focus that will define whether or not we win or lose. And what we saw during Project Warp Speed is that success was creating the therapies as quickly as possibly and moving them to market. Within the pharmaceutical and biotech arena, we have never had a situation where we were sharing so much pre-competitive information, but all of us had the same objective. There were a group of companies that were all competing to be the one that delivered that therapy to market. However, in order for them to compete very quickly, they needed to reframe success from a standpoint that they could actually share information with each other, and they recognized that they could all be more competitive if they were able to co-invest in pre-competitive infrastructure, and then they were each running as quickly as they could towards the goal.
What do you mean by evangelizing vision? Sunday sermons? Building relationships? Engaging friends and foes?
It's an Apple term. At Apple, they always had Apple evangelists, right? You had the Microsoft world and the Intel world, and then you had scrappy Apple that was evangelizing why people needed to think differently. Great ministers do that, right? They have a message, they stand on the pulpit, they persuade other people to follow them. You have to make your table bigger than the opposition's. When you come into solving a complex problem, one reason it is complex and it's intractable is there are a whole group of people who have investments and deep ties to continuing the world to operate in the way that it's currently operating. And what you know is that you will not achieve your goal, you will not be successful unless the world is redefined. The question that you had earlier, you have to redefine success. And so therefore you have to go out and push your message forward as to why what you have defined is going to be the only way in order to move everyone forward towards a common objective, towards economic power, towards revenue. And you are basically doing shuttle diplomacy. You're going door to door. You're sitting down with people. You're persuading them. You're talking to them. A good evangelist listens to their customer. A good evangelist is sitting there doing that shuttle diplomacy and saying, tell me what your problem is. Okay, if I solve your problem this way and you get these 3 benefits from the way I'm suggesting that we do it differently, would you be okay with that? And so evangelizing is not only a matter of taking a message broadly, making your table bigger than the opposition's, but it is also integrated with shuttle diplomacy, which is spending the necessary time to meet with people in each of the different sectors that need to be persuaded, positioning the information within their vernacular and within their point of view so they understand the benefit to them. And when you do that, you grow your table.
Okay, and you talk about breaking down the past and then breaking down the present. Are you actually charting and flowing every step that the company takes? How deep do you go?
It's funny. I'm really basic. And I learned this from when I was doing big mergers and acquisitions and building a single corporate brand for a new merged entity. Say 2 Fortune 500s merged with each other and they have to have one logo, one brand. which is in all situations, I start pulling information and building stacks. It's not the most beautiful process, whether that stack is a literal stack where you perhaps have been pulling documents and printing off information and sort of putting things with like characteristics into different stacks on your floor to try to figure out where the problem was and also to figure out where the commonalities are and where the disconnects are. But it could be on a spreadsheet, right? Which is a benchmarking that's got sort of 5 different columns, and you're pulling out language and you're pulling out circumstances and you're aligning them up down a column so that you're able to see where things aren't lining up perfectly, where you're not focused on a singular goal, where you're not articulating that goal in a manner that it can be understood by the consumer, and it could be understood by your customers, and it could be understood by your employees. And so whether it's virtual or a literal stacking process, that's what I mean by breaking down the past.
As you quantitatively rate and benchmark, you evaluate assets internally, externally. You benchmark against best in class. Are you saying the best in the industry? What do you mean by best in class?
The best at doing the thing you've got to do. When I was remodeling Intel's corporate identity program, because Intel had had a major lawsuit for 7 years with AMD, and they didn't understand why they lost the lawsuit. It was based on their first ingredient brand, and they were getting ready to roll out the Intel Inside program. They sent me around the world, and I met with the best in class of different forms of communication in business management and channel marketing. And so I was at British Airways right after it had been privatized a number of years before, and they had had to standardize on a new operational style that had a visual and communications mechanism that helped communicate what their new business model was to consumers and customers in the government. I was at Louis Vuitton. They sent me to Legoland, which was truly the most fun trip I have ever gotten to do for benchmarking. And it's really, and with Lego, it was interesting as they had me studying the way that Lego did its manufacturing, the way that it did its colors, the way that it did its communications. You want to find the people, you've broken down where you have things that are not operating well within your company. And yes, you want to go head to head with your competitors, but the reality is there might be somebody in a different industry that's really, really good at doing the thing that you want to fix. So why not develop your new process to be more like them than perhaps your competitor who's doing it in the old style way that the industry's done it forever?
When it gets to decision time, keep or toss, help us. Critical, nice to have, but not core to mission, and inefficient, must go, because it doesn't fall into your mission 1, 2, and 3. Could you clarify that and just explain that for us?
Yeah, it's hard. It's the hardest thing that people have to do. And the thing is, you have to do it continuously throughout the year. And at the end of each year, when you do your forecast and you write your business plans for the next fiscal year, you have to rank and rate everything again. And what I mean by that is that you have identified what your perfect future is. And the harsh reality is not all the stuff that you're currently doing, maybe some things that you really love to do or that organically grew up in the company and make the employees happy, but they're not accomplishing your objective. You got to get rid of them. And so you apply numerical value to them. If you say on a 1 to 10 basis, let's be honest with each other, by doing this project, is it going to allow us to meet this revenue target, develop this new product line, meet our perfect vision, compete with these people? And by setting up a numerical standard and forcing everyone into it, you can give them all scorecards. I've done this across the U.S. Defense Department. If you give people their scorecards, they tend to be honest. In one situation, I had a group of generals and I handed them all 5 stickies, all of these pieces of paper on the wall of different things that they were doing to support their personnel, and looking for what they thought was the biggest problem in personnel morale and also safety of personnel. And I'm like, look, you can take your 5 stickies and you can put all of them on one thing, or you can distribute them across the board. And it's amazing how that process of forcing people to vote pretty quickly sifts things out because people know in their hearts and minds what's the right thing. And then you have to let stuff go, and you have to do that very diplomatically. You may hand it over to another organization, so it's an asset that you sell or you give away. You have to explain to the employees. They get to celebrate why it was a wonderful thing, but it's got to go. It's over with. It's not going to be what we have. And sometimes that means people, right? Sometimes when you let go, you're letting go some of your very favorite people in the organization, but their job is no longer relevant to your goal. So it's a hard process, but it can be done.
You say you're transparent, you lead with numbers, and you be direct as you get to the bottom line. But you're trying to do this with compassion and humility and also maintain your revenue stream and not screw things up. So how do you do that?
You have hard conversations, and again, you put yourself in the point of view of the person that you're having the hard conversation with. You articulate their pain points. You own their pain points. You say, I recognize that this is really hard. I know that this is what you've done. For example, one of the hardest things is that if an employee has been told they're supposed to do a series of actions and they're supposed to bring other people along with them in those actions, and so they've spent a lot of time developing relationships and partnerships and, channel marketing partners. They did everything you asked them to do. And not only are you telling them that their job is going away, but they're feeling that their credibility is at risk. So you have to articulate that. And you have to be part of the conversation with the partners. I think leaders make a big mistake when they're harsh and they go, well, it's done. We told you it's done and over with, and we can't afford it anymore. And you have to go back and tell all of those people. Really? That is a very hard task to ask somebody, and that's where bitterness comes from. Sometimes as a leader, you need to join them on that conversation, and you need to sit down with the partner and say, I'm sorry, these are the business reasons why we can't do this anymore. And I know that we have left you stranded. Can we help you build a secondary relationship? Can I introduce you to someone? Maybe you can help them, maybe you can't. But by the mere fact that you acknowledged that you've basically put them in a bad position and you've protected that individual from losing their credibility, that goes a long way.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. Lisa, hang on for a moment. We're going to take a break right now, but coming up in the conclusion of my conversation with Lisa Gable, the best-selling author and former CEO, Lisa shares recommendations for anyone going through large-scale corporate reorganizations.
1, keep your sense of humor and don't take yourself too damn seriously. Those are 2 things I would recommend.
To connect with David, go to davidradlow.com. David's book set, The Principles of Cartel Disruption and Secret Stories of Leadership, Growth, and Innovation, are available wherever books are sold. This has been Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow, a presentation of Forbes Books.